I thank the member for his remarks. We shall now hear the first speaker for the opposition.
Ladies and gentlemen, what we face today is a proposition that's stuck in the past and does not know their facts. Today's side opposition's case line is that the British mandate required the British Empire provide sufficient infrastructure and political instability to allow Iraq to commence nation building. That's our proof of burden today, and that's our theme of today's debate, nation building. We believe that this debate ultimately comes down to the motivations, ideas, and intrinsic designs of the outcomes in Iraq rather than the outcomes by themselves, which side proposition has decided to focus too much on. Today, side opposition has three main contentions to prove our case of nation building. First of all, that the British established an Iraqi national identity. Second, that Churchill was able to lay the foundation for a strong democracy. And then third, that the British mandate ultimately created this beneficial relationship between British and Iraq. We think that Churchill did a great job. But first, let's cover some of the things the side proposition brought to us in their speech. First things first, at the beginning of this speech, he talked about how we're going to set this debate in 1921. Now, we on side opposition don't like definitional debates. However, this is ridiculous. Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to live in the past, that's fine. But we on side opposition are going to be debating in the 21st century because that way you can reasonably take into account the facts and the events that actually happened in Iraq after 1921, which side proposition thinks they can ignore, they cannot. Now let's move on to the first point of contention today, which is about tribal lines. How it should not have been the British's responsibility to draw these arbitrary lines in the sand in Iraq for the Iraqi people. Ladies and gentlemen, we have two responses to this. First of all, if you were to let these tribes, Sunni Muslim, Shia Muslim, and Kurds, draw these arbitrary lines without the help of a British government, without the help of an already developed nation, then what you get is you have religious groups draw separate lines from each other. They will separate from each other. You cannot possibly believe that ethnic groups, which are already so stagnated and so separated from each other, will suddenly come together and create unified nations. Ladies and gentlemen, there's also this problematic idea of holy lands. In Muslim religion, there are these holy lands which are identified in Iraq as sacred to those religions, such as those belonging to the Kurds, just as the Sunni. If you allow those tribal groups to draw those lines in the sand, who will get those holy lands? Obviously, every Muslim religious group wants those holy lands. And what we see is that if proposition were to have their way, if Churchill made the design in that way, we would get more conflicts and an exacerbation of what really happened after the Churchill mandate in Britain, in Iraq. Ladies and gentlemen, the second contention was about self-determination. Now, not only did they not really talk that much about self-determination, they completely went on an entire other tangent about how Faisal was a bad leader because he was deposed from Syria. Ladies and gentlemen, the reason why King Faisal was deposed from Syria was not because he was a bad leader, but because France had conquered Syria and deposed him because of that. He was not a bad leader. On the contrary, he was actually an Arabic nationalist, which we will prove in our debate ultimately helped the Iraqi people create this national identity, which was ultimately beneficial. No thank you, sir. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to move on to my constructive material. Our first point of contention today is that Britain created an effective Iraqi national identity, which was essential to the building of the Iraqi nation. Ladies and gentlemen, in 1921, the members of the Cairo Conference appointed Faisal I as ruler of Iraq. And what we say is that this was a fundamental step in Iraqi history and was ultimately beneficial in establishing a national identity in Iraq. Ladies and gentlemen, we think that Faisal was good for a few reasons. First of all, he was a charismatic man with an unrivaled political astuteness, being able to cooperate with both the British Empire and provide leadership to the Iraqi people. This gave him a broad appeal which won 96% of the votes in the Cairo Conference. As well, ladies and gentlemen, he was a Pan-American. That means that his goals aligned with those of the British mandate and that he desired peace and anti-antagonism between the Muslim minorities. And finally, Faisal's lineage traces to the Prophet Muhammad, who was a unifying symbol that played a central role in the Islam religion. For all these reasons, we think that Faisal was a very good leader. But what did he do exactly that made him so good for Iraq? First of all, he created a national military, which is essential for any newly emerging nation to have influence and sustainability. But moreover, he overcame that gap between the Sunni and the Shia minority groups in Iraq, as well as the Kurds to an extent, by diversifying the administrative offices of the Iraqi constitutional monarchy with various religious and ethnic groups. And what this did is it created a government that allowed more community representation than any Mesopotamian society in history. So we think that overall, King Faisal I was instrumental in establishing the basic political structure for an independent nation, because he was able to establish a rudimentary Iraqi national identity and consciousness, which would later propel itself into independence. Ladies and gentlemen, moving on to the second point of contention. We feel that Churchill was able to establish this foundation for a stable, independent, and ultimately democratic government. Ladies and gentlemen, Churchill was good at a lot of things, and one of them was democracy. And there are certain facets of society that must be established in a newly emerging nation in order to create a democracy. What are they? First of all, the country needs to be relatively stable economically and politically. Second, there needs to be a willingness by the people to unify, not necessarily as one people under one national identity in the case of a new nation, but to work together in order to achieve progress. Now, we've already proved both these conditions in our first contention, as King Faisal I was able to establish an encompassing national identity and was widely accepted as king in Iraq. Yes, sir.
So if Iraq was so great in its present form, as you have alluded to, why did they felt the need to seek independence and seek 58 regime changes over the course of the British?
Now, sir, the reason why the Iraqis gained independence is obvious, because obviously they felt they were ready to become independent. That's fine. However, when you talk about the 58 government changes, that was a result of Arab nationalism. That was a result of radicalists like Rashid Ali, who wanted their socialist reforms to occur in the Iraqi government. That's not the result of British designs. Ladies and gentlemen, what we say is that Iraq started as a constitutional monarchy, not a democracy. And this is an important aspect of nation building designed and thought of by Churchill, as stated in our first condition, because frankly, it's rather difficult to establish a stable democracy out of three broken provinces from the Ottoman Empire, which are in desperate need for improvement both economically and politically. Ladies and gentlemen, these regions, Basra, Baghdad, and Mosul, needed leadership. And they needed a government that was able to make decisions and establish the initial foundations for a strong democracy. So now, why do we think democracy was important and beneficial for Iraq? First of all, because the British were generally very proficient at establishing democracies, and second, because national cohesion is much stronger when more minorities in the population are represented in the government, which is what Faisal had created in his administration, not what side proposition wanted, which is arbitrary lines drawn by minority groups. And in the end, what do we see? We say that Churchill's design was logical, and it did set Iraq on the path for a stable democracy. And we don't think that the factors that stopped Iraq from becoming a democracy, like the coup in 1941, were ultimately Churchill's wrongdoing. Ladies and gentlemen, we on side opposition feel that side proposition has focused too much on the what and not enough on the why. We think side proposition needs a little history lesson. Side opposition has brought you the real case today. Thank you.